Thank you very much for attending today. This is webinar number 6 in the Farm Safety Series with SafeFarms WA. And this one's going to be about, are you breaking the law without realising it? So, are you fulfilling your legal obligations according to the OSH Act of 1984? Does your insurance cover you? Are you sure? So, it recently came to our attention for those people who employ businesses, who have employees, for those businesses that engage contractors, for those businesses who are contractors, even if you don't employ people, the legislation applies. Even if you take drawings, as many farming businesses do, and you don't regularly pay wages or salary to yourself per se, such as companies and trusts, the same rules apply. So I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you to Phil Brunner from Bailiwick Legal for coming on board. And Phil's going to talk in a little while about the law and how it applies to you and your business. Now, I know that there's a number of service providers that come on board today as well, some in the insurance game, some farm consultants, some contractors, some transport operators, and many others. So thank you all very much for your time. And this is being recorded. So if you do have any questions, please put them into the chat over to the side and keep an eye on those. And also, if you can't see the chat, it's down the bottom. There's a word that says more, M-O-R-E, and there's 3 little dots. Click on that and then the chat will come up on the right-hand side. Shortly, I'm going to share my screen, which is PowerPoints, but I just wanted to say hello today and introduce Phil, and then I'll introduce Russell Bresland. On to you, Phil.
Thank you, Marie, and welcome and good morning, everybody. Just a brief overview on Bailiwick Legal. We're a small firm that specialises in the agricultural space, the rural sector, and we assist all participants in that area, in any area of law other than family law and criminal law. Now that latter one might surprise a few people because health and safety breaches are actually a criminal offence, but we do actually work in that area and have in the past assisted farmers to deal with WorkSafe on when there's been accidents and deaths on farm. So we do have a little bit of knowledge and experience in this area, and that's really coupled with the employment side of our practice. As I said, we do cross over into many other areas in the rural sector though.
Fantastic, thanks Phil. And I'd like to introduce Russell Bresland. So Russell Bresland is one of the principals of the Bresland Insurance Group. Russell is also on the board of SafeFarms WA. So we were having a conversation recently, and I'll go more into that, about telehandlers and licences and things, and then this sort of came up. So Russell, please, 1 minute introduction about yourself and Bresland Insurance Group.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure if you can see my image. I'm just getting a blank screen at the present moment, having all sorts of technological issues. Look, Bresland Insurance Group's been working with the rural sector for many years. When I first started broking back in '93, I went back to a lot of my old clients up around the Morawa area. So I've been dealing with the rural sector for a long time. And one of the things that really trouble me in travelling around to the rural sector is probably the lack of a lot of safety things that are happening on farms. You know, I can walk onto a farm, a shearing shed for a classic example. I can go from one shearing shed that has got literally everything in place, and you go to another shearing shed and it looks like nothing's happened in the last 30 years. And it really worries me about claims and what can happen to a farmer if something goes wrong. So look, you know, we take the risk management area very seriously, and that's what we are. We're risk managers. So that's who Bresland Insurance Group is.
Very much, Russell. Okay, I'm going to share my screen with everyone. I've got a number of PowerPoint slides here, which we're going to have some chat. So a bit like on the couch, but we're all actually fairly well distanced today. I noticed that we've got some pastoralists on board. We've got some people from Esperance, from the northern wheat belt, the rangelands, and southwest, all in between. So thanks very much, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. This is the vision of SafeFarms WA, which started in 1994 for farmers by farmers. So have been going about 26 years. I just added up that I've been involved for about the last 5 years, which has gone absolutely snap like that. After a 25-year farming career and growing up on a farm. So I understand it. I see the various different aspects of needing safety, and we've all had some near misses and probably could tell a lot of stories of things that we're very lucky that things didn't go wrong. However, we all probably know someone who has had a serious accident or actually been killed, which is very tragic. This is the vision of SafeFarms WA, and it's about supporting farmers. So that's what we're here for, to support you as the industry in making sure your workplace is a safe environment and reduce and prevent accidents, leading to improved productivity and well-being, which is vital these days. I'd also like to take this moment to acknowledge that we have Tracy Utley on board, who is farming at Hyden, and Tracy McAlpine, who is farming near Latham. Both of those ladies are board members of SafeFarms WA. And I'm sorry, I can't quite see who else is on at the moment while I'm sharing my screen. So if we have any other board members, please send me a text. So Russell, you've just heard from Russell, and a lot of this actual conversation came from, he called recently and said, Marie, do you know that telehandlers need licences? And I said, no. So we've done some work and investigation. That's where Phil came on board. Anyone with a telehandler that's 3 tonne, you actually need a licence. So if you don't know that, now you do. And that's what we so we'll talk more about that later. The Bresland Insurance Group is a broker and a small business owner, just like you, and they obviously have lots of clients in the farming sector, which Russell referred to. We've got Phil here. So Phil also introduced himself, and it was great to be able to hear that they have spent a lot of time in the ag industry, helping agribusinesses. And I believe, Phil, I checked with my husband, we were your clients at one stage. There you go.
Yes, very briefly, but a fair while ago.
Yeah, a long time. So SafeFarms sits here to provide members value. We have a member portal. We have interactive forums, webinars like this one. We ran quite a number during COVID-19, and to help people with all the noise and craziness that was going on. We do have interactive forums that we don't record, and those are all available to full members. We have inductions, and for workers, visitors, family members. They're a fillable PDF, so the lovely Janine, our admin manager who's on this call as well, has sure it's as easy as possible for you, so that there's fillable PDFs. You can actually do them on your phone or a tablet. And they're also in Word, and that suggestion came from Tracy Utley, one of our board members, to say, it's great, but I'd like to add my own bits. So it's in Word for you as well if you want to add your own at the bottom, so that it's all one and you don't have 2 or 3 for different things. There's a specific contractor induction, and we're just finalising with the shearing industry, so specifically for shearing and for shearing contractors. There is a COVID-19 questionnaire, and just to bring to your attention, that's for members. They, it's really if you've got new people coming to work for you. However, it's a great conversation piece if you've got employees who've been with you for some time. There's policies and guides. They can be turned into workplace procedures. We do actually have a lot to do with the government in the policy and planning sort of area as well. We're here to support you either phone or Zoom, and honestly, it's about peace of mind. So what we have done is put together this lovely manual, which is also available electronically if you have a paperless office, and it's been checked by lawyers and insurers, so you can have peace of mind and go, yep, actually, this is what we need. So I'm going to introduce Phil, and Phil, there are a number of slides here. If you could just maybe speak to these, it would be great. Over to you.
Thanks, Marie. Okay, well, you have on your screen the first slide. There are a few, but not too many. And as we go through, as Marie's indicated earlier, If you have any questions, please use the chat facility on the side. I find often that whilst we can talk to you, it's really most of the time talking at you. And if you've got any specific questions, often you won't be the only one with that concern. And it's always, I think, invaluable to appreciate the questions being posed by others that may affect you. And we can address those as we go through. Well, as Marie said, the Occupational Safety and Health Act has been around for quite some time. Albeit within the farming sector, it's probably a piece of legislation that's often ignored or forgotten about, or worse, not even aware of. Since 1984, there's been a general duty on all employers, and as Marie has indicated, that definition is quite expansive, such that it covers directors, officers of organisations, contractors, manufacturers, and body corporates in the sense of associations, and those persons who are actually in charge of a workplace. In a very brief concept, the duty is to ensure that all workers are not exposed to hazards that affect their health and safety in the workplace. The legislation itself, as some of you may appreciate, comprises the Act and the regulations. Now, the regulations is a fairly substantive document covering some 300 odd pages of regulation. Not all of that applies to the farming sector because the regulations are split between certain industries generally and a general section. Whilst the Act provides the broad outline of the obligations, the regulations themselves drill down into more specific obligations. Under the regulations, there are several codes of practice which have been promulgated by WorkSafe. And WorkSafe is the entity, as I think we all know, that actually administers the Act and becomes the prosecutor in relation to any offences under the Act. Those codes of practice live under the regulations, and my understanding at the moment is that the codes of practice are informative at this stage, in the sense that if there is a prosecution, the court will look at a code of practice as being informative but not a absolute requirement.
Shall I move on to the next slide, Phil?
Yes, Marie, thank you. Okay. Yep. So the current penalty regime under the Act falls within 4 particular levels, and there's an accumulation, if you like, of penalties depending on the level of breach. So level 1 breaches, maximum fine of $450,000, to a level 4 breach, which is $550,000 for an individual and up to 5 years imprisonment, and 3.5 million, that should be, for a body corporate. Now those penalties were actually increased in late 2018, and there's some suggestion, which we'll come to shortly, that those penalties are sufficient for the moment, and there is no reason to change those. There is a bill currently before Parliament which is looking to increase those penalties even more. in addition to several other changes, fundamental changes to the Act. So,
Next slide.
Yep.
Yep. Just let me know when you're ready. We've got a few here.
Yep, let's move on. Thanks, Marie. Okay, so looking at some specific issues in the context of the general duty, Section 19 applies to employers, and I'll just use that as the example. That under Section 1 of subsection 1 of Section 19, there is a list of more specific duties which fall within the general duty. It's an inclusive list, which means it's not exclusive. Probably have not said that right. It's not an exclusive list, is what I meant. And there may be other duties that fall within the general duty other than what's expressed in there. From the point of view of my involvement in the industry, it's probably fair to comment that in my experience, most farm enterprises don't engage in induction, and they don't engage in continuous training and monitoring of training. They're quite important aspects of ensuring safety within the workplace, and they are specific requirements within the legislation. So, conceptually, we all think, well, I think certainly that inducting someone into your workplace is not a difficult task. It doesn't need to take that long. You'll already have some idea of the knowledge and experience of your employee before you actually commence them in the employment, so you should have some understanding of their skills and aptitudes, and whether or not they are properly trained, and in some instances have the appropriate certificates to operate any particular machinery on the farm. The training regime, again, is something that really sort of fits on an ongoing basis, and it's a bit like maintaining your motor vehicle. Most of us invariably service our motor vehicles when the need arises. You take it to your mechanic, they do the service, they let you know how many more kilometres you've got before the next service or the time of the next service. And then you religiously, some of you, others not so religiously, will return that vehicle for a service. Training in an occupational safety and health situation is no different to that basic philosophy. You should become habitual in making sure that employees operate their machines safely and go through some perhaps review, if you like, every sort of 12 to 18 months at least. Sometimes you might want to do it more often than that. But it's really like dealing with your motor vehicle. It's a constant check and update regime that you really should be focused upon.
Thanks. That's something SafeFarms can help you with. So
that's right.
Right on. That's what we're here to help with. I'll move on to the next one.
Yeah, I'm just having a look at some of the comments that have come through, Marie.
Can we just keep going, Phil?
Yep.
And I'll come back to you with those questions because I think it's going to impact with the insurance side as well. So I'll keep tabs on things.
Yep.
And
okay.
Yes, I'll keep those. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Marie. As I mentioned earlier, there is a bill currently before Parliament. It's currently before the Legislative Committee in the upper house for a review. The Legislative Committee itself doesn't make changes to the bill, but can recommend changes to the bill. This bill has, as I mentioned earlier, some very substantive changes to the law that will operate in WA. And what has really impacted, I guess, and become the focus of this bill is the introduction of industrial manslaughter laws. As I mentioned earlier, the current Act does have an ability to, does have as a penalty imprisonment. Industrial manslaughter in WA has typically previously been dealt with through or under the criminal code. However, the current government is looking to introduce these industrial manslaughter laws within the occupational safety and health regime. And those laws are quite, I might say and use the word draconian. The premise for the laws, particularly the industrial manslaughter laws, is to align with other states and territories that have also adopted the model code laws. However, in WA, these potential laws are not actually in accord with the model laws across the rest of the state. The government's proposing to actually split the manslaughter laws into two categories, what they call a serious offence and a simple offence. However, the ramifications of that are quite serious, as are the penalties. So the penalties will range from, I think, $5 million fine through to 10 years imprisonment, to $10 million fines and 20 years imprisonment. There has been some cases over east, particularly in New South Wales and Queensland, where the industrial manslaughter laws have been invoked in relation to deaths within the workplace, and the courts have actually found people guilty, including employees, and sentenced those people to prison. So it is a big deal. It's a significant issue, and at this stage, the government is very keen, as I understand, to actually get these laws introduced. Thanks, Marie.
Thanks very much, Phil. That's absolutely right. It is a big deal, and it is a significant issue. And just in case anyone's not clear, yes, this new law, work health and safety legislation, is going to bring Western Australia to be in with the rest of Australia. The industrial manslaughter legislation, the part of the legislation is there, and it's quite ambiguous. WorkSafe have suggested that it's already in the legislation. It's not much different, but on the actual words that I've read, I think it's quite different.
Substantively.
For a legislative council at the moment, so if you don't do anything else from this, make sure that you might like to comment to the Minister about the industrial manslaughter laws that are coming. And it's before a legislative committee at the moment, so we are all watching this space as to how that will look. But bear in mind, those penalties are quite significant now, but the repercussions for the industrial manslaughter are going to take it a whole lot further. Now, I've just noticed a couple of questions in the chat, so I'm going to answer them. And on-farm training is sufficient. And Tracy McAlpine, so Ian McDougall and Tracy have asked, is on-farm training sufficient? Yes, it is. Keep a record of it in your calendar, or keep a record of it if you've got a manual or an electronic copy of some sort of safety system. Just make sure that you jot it down. You can have training sitting in the workshop with a muffin. I've heard food actually really does help quite a lot for engagement. But you can have a chat, and you can be directing someone on how to drive a tractor or how to use the feed trailer, that sort of thing. Don't overthink it, but make sure, maybe as you're training them, paraphrasing to make sure that they actually know what you're talking about and where you're coming from, because their common sense, if they're a backpacker from Romania, is going to be very different to your common sense if you've been brought up on a farm. Now, Ian had another question about third-party trainers and regular reviews. the main important thing is you can provide the training yourself as long as you are competent in whatever it is that you are training that person in. You don't necessarily have to have certificates. Many of us have got the University of Life and have been actually in the workplace that you are training these people in for some time. However, it's really important that you record it, because if something does go wrong, it's the first thing that WorkSafe will look for as the prosecutor and the regulator, and also that lawyers will look for on both sides and work cover potentially. So I think you just need to take this seriously and find the 2 minutes to write down that you've done some training today. And literally, while you're there, you can actually keep a copy of it in the calendar of your phone. I'm just going to look at my business requirements around training and induction of contractors. We're going to get to that in a minute, so I will answer that. It's not about them, it's about you and your business. There's a thing there from Bronwyn. I can't see them wanting to sit for half an hour induction or each individual signing paperwork to say they've been inducted. What are you putting at risk and what is the consequence? Do they have insurance? Can you take 5 minutes to 15 minutes? And I know shearers aren't really wanting to fill out paperwork and do that sort of thing. But what are you putting at risk? And we're going to talk about insurance in a moment and the legal obligations, because we've got 3 examples. One's a quad bike, one's machinery, and one's in a sharing situation. So please watch this space. Another one, if we have a single operator contractor working on a farm, are they covered by their, I can't see the rest of it, if that says insurance, then I would be making sure that they've got a relevant and current certificate of currency of insurance, and it's quite okay to ask. So some of these questions we're actually going to be answering very soon. Thanks very much, Phil. I note the very generous offer that Bailiwick Legal have offered a 30-minute consultation to SafeFarms members. So thank you very much for that generous offer. So this is a statistic that comes from, from Safe Work Australia. And I just want to bring to your attention, it goes until 2015, but I want to bring to your attention the number in the middle where there's 41 workers each year killed between that time frame. In Australia, we're actually up to the high 70s now. It's been 78 and 75 and 76 for the last few years. That is appalling. So there are 78 families that don't have loved ones for birthdays, for Christmas, for family occasions, forever. So there are many, many, many thousands of serious claims for accident and insurances in the ag industry. They're the ones that we know about. A lot of them are serious claims of falling from height. Many of them are muscular stress, and we've probably all experienced or know someone that's been experienced. 66% of workers killed in a single accident. The worst statistics come from tractors. Quad bikes is the leading cause of death, horses and helicopters. So just bringing to your attention. By the way, everyone, accident injury costs $60 billion a year for Australia, every single year. So if we can reduce some of the accidents to the national purse, that will have a big impact. So I'm going to ask Russell to speak to this slide, and noting we've got quite a few things to get through, Russell, there's this one, and then the next slide, probably a bit more discussion about. There are so many different kinds of insurance. You've got liability, you've got management liability, workers' comp, by the way. If you pay anyone as an employee, you must have workers' compensation. You've got you don't have to have any other insurance, but it makes good business sense potentially to have those, and Russell can speak to that. Machinery and equipment, fire, personal insurance, personal accident insurance, livestock, animals, dogs, and the list goes on. So, Russell, over to you.
Thanks, Marie. Yeah, look, it is a minefield, and in the agricultural area, you find most people will have a farm pack, and they'll have workers' comp, and maybe they'll have some cars insured outside the pack with, say, one of the direct insurers. Under these policies, it's really difficult to not shop on price. Most people shop on price, or they go to the local person who's a direct insurer who doesn't provide any advice whatsoever. You have to ask for advice. And this is a plug for insurance brokers, I suppose. We have an obligation by law to provide advice, and if we don't, we are liable. Now, in a farming situation, the covers that you have to have by law is workers' comp, as Marie says, but also you have to have a vehicle that's travelling on a gazetted road registered. They are the two covers that you have no choice in. Everything else you have a choice in. So if you don't want the farm insured, that's up to you. If you don't want your public liability, your machinery, livestock, life insurance, that's up to you. However, the whole purpose of insurance is to avoid that disaster, which could cost you everything that you've worked so hard for, and maybe even the past 3 or 4 generations have worked so hard for, to watch it go sliding down the drain pipe. The big thing that I find most is people have their public liability, but they forget about other areas of liability, and this is with the word there, management liability. So management liability, in very brief terms, is your failure to manage your business correctly. And there are many, many areas here that you can be affected. Employment practices, unfair dismissal, harassment, bullying. Have a look at what's happening in the legal profession right now. These are all issues that you can also be liable for. Your mistreatment of a worker could take you to unfair dismissal, could also take you through other areas, but not only that, if there's a death, the families could sue you for not having the right procedures in place. And this is not covered under your public liability. The other area to be really, and this is on the next slide, Marie, that we talk about, is it's illegal to do anything that's contrary to the public interest. So no insurance policy in Australia is allowed to cover anything that is against public interest. So this means that, and I went and had a look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rural wordings this morning. So these are wordings from like Elders, WFI, QBE, CGU, Allstate. Every single one of those policies has a clause along the lines, we will not cover or pay for any aggravated, exemplary or punitive damages, fines and penalties. So anything that may happen, you're going to be up for that. And the whole issue of this talk today is more about safety and making sure that you've got the right policies and procedures in place. As that next slide that Marie just put up, you know, if something happened to the principal on the place, what would happen? Have you ever thought about what would happen to the farm if someone died? If killed in an accident, but not only that, severely maimed, unable to work again. So it's a burden on the farm, it's a burden on the family, and the farm ends up going under, or the business. Not only, you know, I'm not talking about farms here, I'm really talking all businesses. It's very important that people read their policy wordings. If they're not using a broker, make sure that you understand the cover you have and you don't have. Now, I noticed one question in there about a single contractor, something that you may or may not be aware of. So let's say you've brought a contractor on, an individual, and he's hurt. He could claim under your workers' comp policy, and you would pay that penalty for the next 5 years if it was a major claim. And I'm talking about, you know, a $500,000 claim, and they're not that uncommon. Let's say you've got a proprietary limited company that comes on board and the director's working on your property and he hasn't taken out working director's cover under his public liability. You could also be held liable for his injuries. It's very, very important that before anyone comes onto your property, and this is a risk management thing for yourselves, I'm not worried about the contractor, I'm worried about you in protecting yourselves, is to make sure that before they walk onto your property, they have 2 covers. One is their public liability for a minimum of $20 million. And if they say they haven't got it, then you say, well, I'm sorry, you can't start working. Now, a lot of people say, oh, I can't do that in the local community. Try and walk onto a major, like a Rio Tinto site without your public liability. You're stopped at the gate. You can't proceed any further. And this is slowly coming through. Now, once upon a time, a mine site you could walk onto. Now you can't. And the farmers today need to start to take this attitude to protect themselves, because the society is becoming so much more litigious than it ever was. And if people can see that here's a chance of getting some money out of somebody, they will have a go like they've never done before. So it's really important that with your policies, you understand what you're actually buying. Now, management liability, as I said before, the it's to cover you for failing to manage your property correctly. You can have some statutory fines and penalties incurred under what we call a statutory liability section. Now, then again, it depends on the company you're with and what the wording is, and it's not something that you should do without a broker involved and helping you actually work out what your exposures on your property are. It's really, really important that you have a good understanding, because it's all well and good to say, oh, it'll never happen to me. Well, we can produce statistics that show it certainly can happen to you. So if you haven't had a good look at your wordings, get them out and read them. If you don't understand, ring, if it's a direct insurer, ring and talk to them. If you haven't got a broker involved, if you've got a broker involved, ring them, ask them specific questions. You know, if I was fined for doing this, would I be covered? The telehandler one, that came to me. I was not aware that if you are lifting over 3 tons with a telehandler, that you had to have a crane driver's license. Never knew it. And it's been in legislation for a long time. That also applies to work platforms. Not that I think many farmers have got work platforms, but you may have a telehandler that has a work platform attachment. You raise that above a certain limit, you also have to have a crane driver's license. Look, I could go on and on and on, and I don't think we've got the time and the place to do that right now. Is there anything specific else that you want me to cover there, Marie? Or
No,
and I see there's lots of questions coming through, but
thank you. Thanks very much for that, Russell. We'll keep moving on. I'm taking note of the questions. Back to Ian McDougall, about volunteers and people coming to work on your property. Same rules apply. So in here we have the induction for visitors, family members and others. So what you've really got to think about is what are you putting at risk and what are the consequences. I'm going to talk to that more in the future. To Leslie, would you take their word? What are you putting at risk and what are the
consequences? Can I make a comment on that one,
if they don't have it? Yes?
So you may get a certificate of currency. Now, we have a very strict rule in here. We do not issue a certificate of currency unless the premium is paid. In the past, someone would ring up and say, oh, look, I need a certificate of currency to get on this property. Would you issue one and I'll pay it next week? We issue it, they provide it to that particular company, all well and good, and then they cancel it the following week. It's just something to be very wary of. Never take anyone's word for it. You need it in writing.
It's Phil. There's a question from Varela. What was the things contractors should provide with public liability insurance? The other is complete inductions, which you can do with them. So again, that's in the SafeFarms manual. We've got one for workers, visitors, family members. We've got one for contractors, which is similar but slightly different because it means that their team members have to actually adhere to the way that you do things on your farm. And then there's one for shearers and shearing contractors, specifically written for being inside sheds and the shearing industry. There was a question, who decides if employers are competent? If you're running a property and you're running a business, I would think you would be competent to do that. There is no licensing in farming when it comes to actually saying who's competent to do whatever. You can certainly have certificates, and if you've got them, absolutely great. If you provide all the training information, PPE, and they don't wear it and something happens and they might get something in their eye, by having inductions, certainly going through the policies that you've got and the procedures of how you're going to do things, the training, put your glasses on. Inductions are also proof that you've done the right thing. So I don't want to get this into a he said, she said about WorkSafe and compliance and fear and what the workers said. But I think it's going to be really important that you are clear that by doing inductions, you are working towards compliance. And those are some of the key messages that WorkSafe are looking for. Be very aware that every single regulator and every single prosecutor that will come onto your farm will view the world differently. And it's very difficult it's a bit like putting the tail on the donkey, and this is straight from WorkSafe. Erring on the side of caution by having policies, procedures, discussions, training and inductions will help substantiate that you're at least trying to do the right thing. Volunteers, I spoke to that one as well. I'm going to move on and then we'll have some time for discussion as well. This is a really important question that I don't know if we ever all really think about too much, because we're busy in the doing. We're actually busy working in our business. Occasionally we'll take that step back and work on our business. We'll plan for the operational year. We do our budgets. We might have reviews with a farm consultant or a bank or our insurer or our legal people. What would happen to your business if you were taken out of it? Either temporarily or permanently. What would happen to one of your workers if they were taken out of it, temporarily or permanently? And tragically, what if it actually ended up in death? So a really important question to ask yourself is, what are you putting at risk? You are running multi-million-dollar businesses. Many of you have family members, life partners, business partners, children, contractors, or friends working for and with you. So what are you putting at risk by not having a safety system in place? What are the consequences? Phil talked about the fines. For an employee, a first offence fine is $50,000. So if they're not taking it seriously, this is your opportunity to remind them that it's a really good idea to do this. Because sometimes you actually have to shift the focus off you because it gets really emotional. And if it's not your style and you don't know a lot about this, and trust me, I've been there, then give us a call, jump on Zoom, we can help you through it. We'll help you through it. But the fines are horrendous, starting at $250,000 to $10 million, jail, and ultimately, and very sadly, death. So Phil and Russell and I got together. We talked about some key areas that are often where there's tragedies and accidents on farms. Now, just for everybody's information, that's a crash test dummy on the left-hand side underneath that quad bike. It shows you what can happen. Now, helmets must be worn according to WorkSafe. Crash protection devices might actually stop the person being completely asphyxiated, which is the leading cause of death with quad bikes. However, it might stop the head getting crushed, but it won't stop the rest of your body getting crushed. Just for your information, this state government has no appetite for crash protection devices and subsidies. So if anyone's going to ask that question, I've already answered it. And other states have contributed to crash protection devices. That's up to them. The workplace comment at all times is to use the safest vehicle for the task. So if you have quad bikes, and they are the mode of transport that you use on your farm, that's entirely up to you. But be aware of the consequences if someone actually doesn't know how to ride. And I think we all know someone who's either had a leg squashed or unfortunately might have even died or certainly been thrown off because of terrain, etc. And you can see the amount of people that are involved in that accident for one quad bike on the right-hand side. So Phil, can we start with you, please? And if you can just give us a few short answers about the liability of not wearing PPE, not doing the right thing, your employers got you trained up, and then you decide to fly off and go and get the cows in. And then Phil, I'm sorry, Russell, if you could just maybe alert everyone to what you can and can't insure for, because I'm going to use an example of a young lady who, she was 23, she was on a farm, she was new to the farm, she was a backpacker from the UK. She'd arrived on the farm and had been there for about a week. She went out to, using a quad bike, went out to do a job. Unfortunately, she actually went over the handlebars, and that's about 3.5 years ago now. She is being fed through a tube. She was sent home to her home in the UK. She's being fed through a tube, so she's a complete quadriplegic. Her family are living with and dealing with her being a complete quadriplegic and being fed through a tube. There was a $44 million lawsuit applied to that farming business. The stress and trauma that the family farming business went through has been monumental. The lawsuit was reduced to $12 million, which is a lot less than 44. Now, that farm's no longer in existence. The family is falling apart. And by the way, remember, the young lady is 27. She's being fed through a tube and will be for the rest of her life. Over to you, Phil.
Thanks, Marie. Quite a sobering case, that one, but not necessarily alone. What's remarkable about that case is really the quantum of damages that arose due to the injury to the particular worker. And of course, that quantum is needed to sustain her for the rest of her life. That's why the quantum is so huge. But having said that, in situations, in a few cases over east, there have been similarly, in relation to deaths particularly, some pretty hefty fines meted out in the last couple of years where employers have been found wanting with respect to their safety regimes. Pretty hefty in the sense of monetary values as well as jail time. So a case recently in, I think the ACT, company was fined $3 million and the two principals, sorry, this was Queensland, the two principals were each jailed for 10 months each. It's imperative that employers ensure the safety of their employees, and training and induction are part of that. So if I can then reflect forward, if we do end up with the industrial manslaughter laws that are being promoted by the current government, those fines and penalties will increase. And there are perhaps a few stings in the tail in relation to that, which fall back to the case you've just mentioned, Marie, in the sense that that farming business in Tasmania is no longer operating. Under the current laws being proposed by this state government, it will be itself an offence to insure against a penalty. So any monetary fine imposed through serious injury or death on a farm, insurance won't cover that fine. So if a court fines a business or even an individual a few $1 million, it's likely to be the death of that enterprise. And that's a significant consequence. On top of that, you could find the directors and officers, those in control of the workplace and in control of the business, in jail. So it's a double whammy. Not only...
So it's a lose-lose.
Absolutely. Not only do you lose your business, you effectively lose your family in many senses because you're locked up in prison. So the consequences of even serious injury and death in the workplace, for various policy reasons, governments are giving those consequences greater emphasis and imposing what government's saying is significant deterrent. So it really will be, as Russell's mentioned and you yourself, Marie, a valuable risk management tool to ensure that businesses implement proper safety and safety systems.
Phil, what about Russell? What you can and can't insure?
Yeah, quad bikes in particular. Look, the insurance industry, I think, is trying to get these banned because of the nature and the extent of injuries. I think it's 17 degrees is the incline that you need for them to go over. But the one issue that we haven't really touched on, that young lady was 23. What if it was a 3-year-old child that was on the back of one of these quad bikes? Now, a child doesn't really need to bring an action till they become an adult. So if it's 3, you may not hear about this or it could be hanging in there for 15 years. Then Phil can correct me on the statute of limitations after they turn 18, another 5 or 6 years down the track. before the matter is settled. And then, is your public liability, if you've got 5 or 10 million, going to be sufficient to cover any, not the fines, but the actual legal costs in getting to the eventual settlement, going to be sufficient for you? One of the reasons that you see under your motor vehicle policies, for example, your limit of liability is now $32.5 million, not 20. So is 20 enough? But these machines, the quad bike, and I'll stand to be corrected, from what I can gather, is the most dangerous piece of farm machinery ever invented in the history of farming, and has maimed and killed more people than any other piece of machinery in a farming environment. So they are really, really dangerous. But, you know, you need to make sure you've got your risk management, as Phil and Maria said, procedures in place, policies and procedures, taking the time out, doing a toolbox meeting every day, explaining, you know, what you're going to be doing during the day, explaining what machines are going to be used. And it might sound like going over the same thing time and time again. But go, and I'll use an example, go onto a major construction site anywhere in the world, and this happens every single day before they start work. But yeah, so it's just use safety. Safety is very important. Just one other thing with safety, a bit like having policies and procedures in place, I can see the day coming, and I'll use an example here of burglar alarms on a business premises. Now, once upon a time, if you had a burglar alarm, you got a discount on your premiums. Today, if you don't have a burglar alarm, your premiums are loaded. So it's no longer a discount, it's actually a loading if you don't have the right things in place. And the way WorkSafe and the legislation is going, it's going to be very important for farms to look more seriously in making sure they have got these safety issues in place.
Thanks very much, gentlemen. I'm going to move on to the next slide. Now, noting that we are at the end here, if anyone does have to leave, we're going to keep going. This, it will be recorded and it will be available to participants so that you can come back and check. If not, please stay on board. I'll answer the questions shortly. So this webinar came about because Russell and I were talking, and then with Phil, about the telehandler. And if you have a telehandler above 3 tonne, then you actually need a licence to operate it. So we went and checked according to WorkSafe, and yep, sure enough, there it is. It's all there for us. But do we know where to look, and how do we actually get that information? And then what kind of licence? We're not going to go into the licensing side of things, and also noting time. So this might be one that we can move through fairly quickly, Phil and Russell, because I think the shearing one will be a bit more of a conversation. And to those who are putting questions into the chat, I will come back to you. Over to you, Phil.
Thanks, Marie. I think, yes, move on from this one fairly quickly. I think perhaps in looking at this licensing issue, it probably raises a particular perspective that if you're unsure, seek advice. And that also applies even more so if you have a serious incident on farm or even a death on farm. The first thing you should be doing is getting some legal advice. Even before WorkSafe become involved, call a lawyer, get some succinct, clear advice as to what your rights and obligations are in relation to that. That might sound a bit harsh, but the reality is the sooner you actually get some advice and representation to help you through that process, the better.
Right, thanks, Russell.
I think that also applies. If something happens, ring your insurance broker immediately. Don't go admitting anything. Talk to your broker and get them involved right from the scratch, because they may have the right areas that they can direct you. They may have contacts in the legal field, the people that specifically handle this issue. And don't forget, ignorance is no excuse for the law. You know, if you've got one of these telehandlers on your property and you're going to do nothing about it following today, you basically are aware of it now. So if anything ever happened, you would be guilty.
It's no longer hypothetical.
Sorry, Marie.
Oh, once you know about something, it's no longer a hypothetical. So
Yep.
parents were aware of it. So we often get calls from members and politicians and the media about the shearing industry. So having been a super fine wool producer myself, I've shorn sheep, I've crutched sheep, I've worked in shearing teams. Yes, believe it or not, I've actually shorn sheep, not too many, maybe 50. And potato, I think the most important thing is that we are collaborative as an industry going forward and that we have a safe place of work. So as an employer, we must provide a safe place of work. If we are doing cocky sharing or cost plus or even contracting, we must still provide a safe place to work. Now with that, there are some best practice shearing shed designs. If you don't have facilities, as in toilet facilities for your staff and those contractors coming in, you actually need to get some very quickly. You can get a portable one, but you need to get some. You need to have a place for them to eat as well. And, you know, think of it if it was in, what would you like to be sitting in and eating in compared to what you may be providing? Now, I've also seen a number of really different sheds. We've got the old one at the top, and I've worked in them. I might even know some family members that have still got them. And there's a perception in the industry, or certainly outside of the industry, and the media really like to ramp it up a bit occasionally, is that our shearing industry is still similar to the painting, the very famous painting here where they're clipping away at the sheep. And it's not like that, to my knowledge. So having renovated 2 shearing sheds extensively, one down south and one in the wheat belt, what does cost money. However, the efficiencies in the use of the actual shed and what we were able to do with the shed after shearing, crutching, everything was so much more. So we really sat down and thought about it. Now we've got, I deliberately put that picture in the middle because it's got the overhead gear there going around. Now there's some real rules and regulations about that. So if you're standing really tall and put your hand up, then it's got to be safe. Now, if you're a guy and a guy that's 6 foot something and they put their hand up, they're probably going to touch it. So it's probably not a safe workplace. So this is something that's evolved over time. This is straight from WorkSafe, I can tell you, because I had someone call and ask me. So it may be time to invest in either some guarding on your overhead gear or invest in the actual condensed version. Now, just in case you're realising, this pen is about 7 to 8 millimetres wide. Any guarding that you put on any piece of machinery or such as this, that's about the size of the perforated mesh that you should be using according to WorkSafe, just so you know, 7 millimetres. So someone can't get their finger through it. And on the bottom, just for good measure, there are a lot of women who are starting to shear now, so I didn't want to be sexist. So there we go. I've heard many stories of the us and the them, and again, I don't want to spiral into something like that. I think it's important that we are collaborative and that we provide a safe place of work going forward. Phil, over to you, and then Russell.
Thanks, Marie. Yes, look, I've had a fairly long involvement with the Shearing Industry Association as well, and I'm aware of the number of accidents and injuries that arise through the contractor area. And you know, this is one of those sort of shear wall areas, I'll refer to it as that, where liability could cross over quite easily from contractor to farmer, depending on the nature of the injury, where it happened, why it happened, whether anyone was at fault, whether it was the machinery, whether it was the floor, whether it was the chute. You know, so there are invariably crossovers where injury occurs in a shearing shed to a contracting team. And there has been historically a number of cases where both the contractor's insurer and the farmer's insurer have had to stick their hand in their pocket to deal with fines and penalties. because there's a dual liability in some respects. So, yeah, a very perhaps not necessarily unusual situation in the sense of a contractor coming onto farm, but it's unusual certainly in the context that these contractors are there usually for more than one day and often for weeks on end. And in some instances, typically historically, used to live on farm. So yes, it's an area. I'm not going to say it's black and white. It's very grey. It's very grey. It's a very grey area when it comes to risk and risk management, and very grey area where there's an injury within the team.
Thanks very much, Phil. On that, just so that you know, and I did have a call from a person who was, unfortunately, a workers' compensation claim had finished, and he was a shearer, and he rang me to say he wanted to help us to shut down the shed, and I said, we don't do that. Inside this full safety system, we have an accident incident report form. So you're not opening yourself up to liability, you're actually covering your backside going forward if and when something happens. And by all means, if there's any reason, take photographs as well, because you never know when you're going to need them, and it may just sort of protect you going forward. Russell, over to you.
That incident report form shouldn't be restricted to the shed. It should be for every single incident that happens on the farm property. And the more photos you can take, the better. A picture tells 1,000 words. Shearing sheds. I'm the son of a shearing contractor. I've been wandering in and out of shearing sheds since I was about 8 or 9. I used to go with my father every Saturday morning to the shearing shed. My job was to throw the king browns into the dam or the water tank so they were nice and cold by 6. It was my job at the breaks to sharpen the cutters, clean up the combs on his old Lister shearing plant, all overhead gear, no safety. You know, I was in there, rounding up the sheep. I was also dragging them out if it was crutching time. I was classing, doing all of those things as a kid. Thankfully, nothing ever happened. But thinking back on it and what used to happen in those sheds, it amazes me there hasn't been more serious accidents over the years. And looking at the pictures brings back so many memories. But I think from the farmer's point of view, it is again very, very serious, and something that should be done is getting a copy of the certificates of currency. Doesn't matter whether it's a single operator or a contractor, because if they don't have it, and if they don't have it on their employees, you are the one that's going to be liable. And that can again be a very, very expensive exercise. Kids should never be allowed in shearing sheds. Visitors to the farm shouldn't be allowed in shearing sheds unless they have been inducted. Go onto any construction site and see if you can walk past the control room if you haven't been through the induction. I have a limestone quarry insured, and I've done their insurances for, 25 years. Back in the beginning, I'd drive out there, I'd drive down to the face in my car, I would be getting out and they would have cross-cut saws, they would have everything go, and I'm wandering around this mine with no protection, nothing. Today, I can't get past the reception area without, first of all, doing, and I've been out there many times, doing an induction. Even though I've done an induction every time I've been there, I've got to do a new one. And this is what I think farms need to start to think of, that they're no longer the mum and dad operation. You guys are running multi-million-dollar operations and really need to step up to the plate like a business in Perth running a multi-million-dollar operation would have the right policy, hopefully the right policies and procedures in place. The attitude that a farm is a farm and it's a completely different scenario is certainly not the case. And the shearing, as Phil said, it is so grey that, you couldn't give a black and white answer if you tried.
Thanks very much, Russell. I actually checked in with the WA Shearing Association and asked the question of, is it normal for contractors to go and check the sheds before they start? And it varies. So if you're the farmer, consider what are you putting at risk if you don't have the contractor come in and say, yep, we're good to go. If they turn up, show their face sometimes during shearing, is that enough? I think it's really important for you to just consider what are you putting at risk and what are the consequences. And I've been insisting prior to shearing, and I don't care what the shearing contractor says, and I've been there, and I've been on the blunt end of bullying by shearing teams, but I've also worked with amazing shearing teams and in them. So I've seen all sides. I think it's vital that you would invite the contractor prior to starting anything going on in your shed where you have external people coming in. And I know that's in some shearing teams, it's different people every day. You've actually just got to get over that and do your inductions, because if you're not, what is the consequence of what you're putting at risk, considering your multi-million-dollar business? The other thing that I've heard quite often is about, what about kids in shearing sheds? I've been a kid in a shearing shed. My dad was a shearer and a farmer. Our kids have been in shearing sheds, but there was always the no-go zones. They were not allowed on the board when it was in operation. I've heard of kids sitting in wool bins all day because the shearer didn't have childcare. And then I've heard of lady farmers who've actually gone down to the shed and brought this random child up to spend the day with them because they felt it wasn't appropriate to have the child in the shed, which it's not. So I went to the WA Shearing Industry Association and asked, what about kids in shearing sheds? And, Darren Spencer kindly shared with me, he just asked me a question and said, would you have kids on a construction site? Of course not. So it's a question to help you shift the focus potentially off you and on the situation. What we also do is, in our webinars and ideas and support, is give you tips and ideas on how you can actually implement some of this stuff if you're meeting barriers and challenges and issues. I'm going to move on, but there are a couple of questions here. Sarah has a transport business as well as a farming business and is asking what should be provided. Russell, you may be able to answer this one, please. What do they need to provide to farmers? So they're going onto properties and they're delivering freight. What do they need to provide going forward? Is it employee indemnity, workers' comp, public liability? What sort of thing would they need if they're a service provider going on to a farm? And the other question was, how can you tell if the certificate of currency is current? Is it dated?
Yeah. The easiest way to tell if a certificate of currency is current is ring the insurance company that issued it and say, this contractor has come onto my property. I would like to check if this certificate of currency is current. Can you please confirm? That's really the only way to actually check a certificate of currency. Nowhere on it does it say whether the premium's been paid or not. It tells you what the class of business is, what the period of insurance is, and who the company is. Never accept for example, if you're using a broker and the broker sends one on his letterhead or her letterhead, don't accept that. Ask for it from the actual insurance company. And
where does privacy fit in there, Russell?
Well, you're only asking the insurance company if you could say, look, I've received this certificate of currency. I just want to check if this policy under this name is current. That's all you're asking. Okay. And I think they have an obligation to provide that information.
Service provider?
Well, again, they should be providing the same, but, how far do you go? And I think, Phil could answer that. Everyone that comes onto your property or everyone that comes into my business, do I ask them before they walk through the door? Probably not. We
had a transport business for a while, and every year, so we were subcontracting to another business, and every year I just knew the 1st of July I had to provide it to them. Yep. Or we would be in breach of that contract. So I just did it automatically. So that might be a way to address that.
And the other thing is, if you're constantly using the same provider and they've given you one, diarise when that policy is due and follow them up and say, look, your certificate of currency that you gave me last year in August expires in March. Can you please provide me with another one because this one is no longer valid?
Thank you. I've got a comment in the chat. Do we need to check everyone's certificates every time, or do you think they might be dodgy? I think you've actually answered that one, Russell. And And the contractor certificate currency cover public liability, workers' comp, are they different documents? They're actually different.
Yes, they will be. They might be even different
documents.
Insurance companies. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you. So it is a big deal, and it is really significant, to quote Phil from earlier. So responsibility versus compliance. Where do we go? What do we do? It's a bit like a seesaw, and I've deliberately found a three-way seesaw because it can actually be very, very challenging to juggle it all. And there's a comment in there about getting inductions done prior to, I'll comment on that so prior to like 7 in the morning, trying to get kids out of bed and on the bus to school, as well as dealing with the shearers as they come in. Responsibility versus compliance. In all of this, I'm just going to ask you to consider, what are you putting at risk and what are the consequences? The most important thing you can do when providing training and information, so you're adhering to the Act there, is identify hazards and risks in the workplace. You provide training and information. You do provide the PPE. Now, bear in mind, if anyone's wearing masks and they've got facial hair, you need to make sure that those masks fit. So that's an extra level of training that you may need to share with your team members. It's common sense, really, but it's just taking that little bit extra. Provide protocols about safe work practices, policies, workplace procedures. Of course, here we go, something we prepared earlier. And the guides that we've got in there can be used as policies. We've got quite a lot of checklists, JSAs for that short and sharp before you start to do something. So they're checklists for you to know that the people that you're working with understand what it is that needs to happen and how they're going to do it. In all of this, and inductions as well, it's actually a communication tool. So it's a way of unlocking how they think and how you want the job done. They might have been on farms before, but have they been on your farm? That was a question that came to me from a farmer recently, and I thought it was an absolute ripper. So if we can actually get our team members to be doing a risk assessment in their heads as part of their unconscious competence, we've done them a great favour, but they're also doing us a great favour as a farming business. An emergency. If someone knows first aid, happy days, great. Please don't just do a tick and flick of first aid because someone has done first aid and yet we're compliant, that's all great. Consider it slightly differently. So if there was an accident and you were the first responder, do you know first aid enough to save someone's life? If there was an accident and you were the someone that was at death's door, do the rest of your team and family members know how to save a life? Do they know first aid enough? People alive for long enough for the ambulance to get there. So please don't just think of, yep, we're good, what someone on the property's got first aid. Consider it from a really different angle. Do you know what the emergency procedures are? Do you know the 000 numbers, etc.? Businesses, we're working alone. We're tired. We're working long hours. So we've got to find ways to incorporate our responsibility with compliance, but ultimately we have a responsibility to ourselves and others, and this is everybody in the workplace, to make sure that the workplace is safe. I've just gone through all of those sorts of things. These are here and everybody will be able to watch this later, but there are some very clear responsibilities of employers, and this is adhering to the legislation. Safe place of work, adequate training and information, the correct PPE gear, with the right vehicle for the task. I'm not going to go on to it because a lot of that's all the things that we would do anyway, but once they're there and written down, you can use them as a checklist. Ultimately, ensure that everybody knows their role and responsibility. Brings us to responsibility of workers. Now, workers can be volunteers, they can be visitors. It's always handy to have the kids home from boarding school as well, because there's a bit of cheap or free labour. Make sure that they understand the way that you want things done. They're not going to be a larrikin or a cowboy and take risks. Like if you're working with cattle, make sure everybody knows how to shut the gate properly, because working with cattle can be a life and death situation if you need to get out of that really quickly. If you're concerned about a health condition, and this is for workers, you've got to speak up. You've got to say that you're concerned. You've got to tell your supervisor. If you're at risk and you don't know what to do, then please speak up and tell your supervisor. That unfortunate young lady that I spoke about earlier should have spoken up to the business owner or her manager or supervisor and said, I don't know how to ride a quad bike properly. She should have had more training, but she should have also spoken up. And please, workers, don't be a hero and try and do everything. So vitally, there's been a couple of questions about contractors, and I will go through the chat, everyone, shortly. The same rules apply. That's it. The same rules apply. They must provide a safe workplace, and if they're a contractor, they must check your farm to make sure that it's a safe workplace before they let their people out there. We've talked about the certificate of currency of their insurance. And what are you putting at risk by not checking? It's okay to ask, and it's okay to insist as well. Can your business afford a $2 million fine? Do you want the trauma of knowing that an accident happened on your property and the stress of something like that? I would think not. So, how do we find the time to do all of this? Many of the reasons I've been about the ag industry is people don't know what they don't know. They're overwhelmed because there's a lot going on, and if you're still on this call, there's still a lot going on. They're scared of getting it wrong. If you're scared of getting it wrong, give us a call. Sign up. We'd love to have you as a member. We've got some amazing brains who are here ready, willing and able to help. Phil Brunner, you've got 30 minutes of free time, not 30 seconds, 30 minutes of free time with Bailiwick Legal. And Russell, pick up the phone. They don't have time. I've deliberately left that clock there and saying 19 minutes. It's actually a trick that I use for myself. If I've got to get something done, I set my clock for 19 minutes. You just heard the alarm go off, very timely. And it was to get the job done. So 19 minutes. Have you got 19 minutes in your very busy day to do a induction with one of your team members? I would hope so. So how do you eat an elephant? It's a metaphor. You choke it down. You eat it one bite at a time. Not that I'm into eating elephants. It's a metaphor. And the Nike tip, really, just do it. Seriously, people. You're putting a lot at risk by not having safety systems in place. So this is here. Phil's spoken to this a lot. We're responsible. I've spoken about $50,000 fine straight up for a worker. Body corporates, 250, 500, 5 million plus jail. You're increasing profit. By reducing your input costs, whether it's wages and time and labour because of efficiency, insurances, sometimes you can negotiate lower premiums, fertiliser, chemical, whatever it is. If you reduce your variable input costs by 1%, it can impact your EBIT, your pre-tax spending, by up to 15%. Businesses with safety systems are up to 38% more productive according to research. 1% increase in productivity can impact your EBIT, your pre-tax spending, by 10%. So really quickly, 1% up, 1% down, it's a 25% impact on your EBIT. Think about that. If nothing else, that might just help you get it over the line with some of your business partners. It's about improving communication. A backpacker from Milan, a backpacker from Ireland, a kid who's just finished ag school is actually probably pretty aware of a lot of safety, or someone who's come from the city and looking for a job to live the dream. Are they going to have the same common sense as you, who's been running your farming business for a long time? Compliance, it's been in place since 1984. The return on investment. For less than a cup of coffee a day, you can invest in the full safety system. We've got a website, it's a portal, there's a whole lot of information in that portal. You're not going to have downtime. Everybody goes home safely. These are some of the things that WA Farmers has been doing and is going to work on. Going forward, we've got a number of the logos of the people who have been supporting SafeFarms recently. The lovely Loretta Adams, who is she has a business called Blue Jay Ag Solutions, and Loretta has done some work with SafeFarms. She is CFO of the family farming business and also has a part-time side hustle of she helps us. She actually has done quite a lot of analysis and maybe even spoken with some of our members and she's available to go and do some on-farm appraisals to help you get on track, or even do the inductions with your team members prior to seeding starting or whenever you need it. Watch the green card for ag safety. It's something we're developing. We're hoping to launch it in Farm Safety Week, which is the third week of July, and it's going to be the green card for ag safety. We send people on it. You can have it's almost like a mini induction about hazard perception, risk management, understanding what you might be going to see when you're working on a farm. So they've sort of done their first induction by the time they get to you, and you've got then the time and they're in a headspace ready to do the on-farm induction that you will be doing. We'd love for you to work, please like our Facebook page, and so that we can share more with you. And we've also been working with Rural Edge, so we provided quite a lot of the content that's actually in the Rural Edge, and it came from our manual and system. Ruth Young does a really good job delivering that workshop, and she was actually she's a member of SafeFarms, and we provided a lot of content, and thanks to Tracy Felpine for her contribution there as well. We run workshops pre-COVID-19. We were running about 20 workshops around the state, whether they be in Kununurra or all down to Esperance or all in between. That one's from Benue. It actually organised for us to go up there, and we ran a whole day workshop. So thanks very much to everyone involved. And a very special thank you today to Bailiwick Legal and to Bresland Insurance. I'm just going to go to the last slide and then ask and answer some of the questions. Just noting at the top of that, anyone that signs up before the 30th of June is eligible for a 20% discount. Any of Bailiwick Legal's clients and Bresland Insurance clients, same. All you need to do is email at that email address, and we need to have proof that you have paid it into the bank account by the 30th of June. It's okay to pay on the 30th of June and we get it the next day. That's fine, because sometimes we happen with banking. But we'd like to have you on board. Now, I'm just going to go through some of the chat and might refer to Phil or Russell to answer some of the questions.
While you're looking on that, just one quick thing. What we're noticing from the insurers now as a result of COVID-19, they're amending their infectious diseases clauses, and they're taking out basically the word pandemic. So it doesn't matter what sort of infectious disease, they are basically all now excluded. And that we're finding coming through in the wordings. We had one today from another company, and I looked at the wording, and they basically are taking out the word pandemic. So if it's an infectious disease, they're not covering it. Just something to be wary of.
Thanks, Russell. One of our participants has got a shed being built. They've paid a particular company, and that company has got subcontractors coming onto the property. And noting the tragedy of the young man that was blown off the shed roof in Esperance recently, do you have any suggestions for the participant about the insurance and the certificate of currency? What should they be looking for?
Okay, if they've got a contractor coming on to build a shed, they should be obtaining from that contractor a copy of their contract works policy, and that contract works policy should include liability to a minimum of 20 million. Now, if they've got that in place, then, and also the workers' comp, make sure the contractor has the workers' comp in place. Doesn't matter whether it's a shearing contractor or a shed builder, the rules are really the same. Make sure that the proper insurances are in place. If you're unsure, ring your insurer and or your broker and ask. We don't mind answering those sorts of questions and can guide you the correct way.
Thank you. There's a couple of comments in there. Sorry, I'm just going back up, everyone. Sending a detailed hard copy induction package to the shearing contractor to be read and signed by each worker and returned to the farm on the day of work starting. Would that be appropriate? I think that's a great start.
Don't do it on the same day and expect them to have it back in 10 minutes. You must allow the people adequate time in which to read the document. So if you're going to send it out at 9 o'clock and expect them to be working in the shed at 10 o'clock, no, that's not adequate. But, you know, if they're coming the day after tomorrow and you've sent it to the contractor saying, this is the rules of our shed, that we need to make sure that all yourselves and or your workers, contractors are aware of the policies and procedures, please have them read and have the signed copies back to us by X day.
And that can be an electronic, that's fine, isn't
Yeah.
it, Phil?
Yep. Sorry, Phil.
And I guess, you know, with shearing teams, often there's different people on different days. And I know it can be challenging. I had 3 kids that I had to get off to the bus in the morning before shearing. And if they're really small, it's actually really challenging. So how can we get around that, do you think? Any ideas, Phil?
Not quite sure what your question is, Marie. How can you get around?
Well, getting the inductions done, and probably the pushback from, say, the team, and this is any contractor really, but there's a time frame involved with shearing. They get going by 7:30.
Yeah.
How can we maybe address some of the challenges that we might face when, you know, they just don't want to do it. They think it's rubbish.
Okay, it's an interesting one, and this is an issue that arises with the contractors themselves. I've usually attend their annual meetings and their half-year meetings, and this is invariably an issue. The contractual relationship between a farmer and a contractor is an interesting one because most often it's not documented. Having said that, that relationship is usually one that's lasting and usually one where both parties know roughly when the events are going to happen in advance. Right? It's not like you suddenly think, oh, my sheep needs shearing this week and I'll get a contractor. These things are usually done well and truly in advance and knowingly in advance. And the advice I've provided to the Shearing Contractors Association and others within this sector is that, you know, having a written contract where these issues of risk and insurance are dealt with should be something that is a matter of course. It's just something that should be done, and it can be done well and truly prior to the event itself. And that's one way of ensuring that proper inductions are done, one way of ensuring that certificates of insurance are provided, and one way of ensuring that the contractor and the farmer understand each other's position. And so coming to your point, I think having that discussion, having that arrangement, having a written document dealing with that engagement where the obligations and the rights of each party are actually established and set out is extremely valuable. It's just not done. I think there's no reason why it's not done. It can be done, it's just not. It's a risk management exercise at the end of the day.
Also with the contractor, there is no reason why an induction couldn't be done with the principal contractor the day before or a few days before. But part of the agreement is that on the day when the shearers or the people come to, whether it's shearing or something else, that principal contractor then does the induction on behalf of the farmer. Phil, how would that sit?
That troubles me somewhat, Russell, because you're setting up an agency relationship between the farmer and the contractor, the principal contractor, vis-a-vis the contractor's obligation to his or her team. You're further blurring the lines for a risk and insurance perspective.
I was just trying to get over this, what Marie was saying, especially if there's young children and you've got this conflict of time
well, it's certainly a conflict of time. I think, you know, conceptually, your concept of having someone or having the principal come in for an induction before the actual team arrives is sensible. In a practical sense, though, I'm not sure you get much traction with that. But you know, this is, I guess, part of the issue within the industry. in a very practical sense, a lot of players in the industry don't take the time to deal with these things, whereas they should. Attending, the farm site a day or two before the team to go through the shed perhaps ought to be an inherent practice adopted by the industry, both sides of the industry, before the contracting team actually arrives. Having then advised the principal is in charge of the principal's team, the farmer isn't. It becomes the principal's obligation to ensure the safety of those people within the shed environment.
Mm.
Now, there is, as we mentioned earlier, a bit of crossover and grey there, but I guess if you've had that discussion with the principal and the principal's been on site, has been shown any potential hazards, has been shown and being made aware of those hazards, then it's over to the contractor to deal with those with his or her team. And again, document that process, right?
Mm.
If you know you've got some hazards in the shed and you've told the contractor, make a note of that. Take some photos. All those things are good risk management tools.
Great, thank you. I'm just noticing a couple of questions in the chat, and then we're going to finish up, everyone, because we started a bit late, so we're going a bit late. Inductions. There was a question, where do we get information about inductions? Come and see us, something we prepared earlier. Honestly, this took about 8 months to get right. It's been checked by insurers and lawyers and WorkSafe. So we feel comfortable that it's certainly a really good start. You can go and do your own, and you can go and find them for free or on the internet. However, you can know that that's also been checked by lawyers and insurance and pulled apart. We have one specifically for pastoral. They are customised to every business. We had a farming business on here who also has a transport business, and we've customised it to assist the transport business. We have other service providers as members as well, and we customise it to their business. The FSA is a job service agreement, and it's what you do before you start doing a job, and it says who's going to do what by when and accountability. So it's really a conversational tool, but it's also a document that can give you the example of what you've actually planned to do. And then you can check it afterwards to see how efficient you were as well. A question, what do you do if you're away from the property for 1 day or even weeks at a time? You do need to actually have a break and have a holiday as well. My suggestion is that you delegate management to whoever the next is in charge that you feel is competent. And really, you're the only one that can make that decision. And there was one question about hazards as well that I'm just trying to find. Hierarchy of control in absence of the owner of the farm for a day or a couple of weeks when there's one or more employees. Assuming all inductions and training has been completed, well, you're leaving the farm hopefully in good hands, and you are going to be able to delegate down the track. Now, the other thing was, what if you provide all the PPE gear, you provide all the training and all of the inductions, and then your employees don't do it? If you see them not doing it, it's no longer hypothetical, and then you will actually be the responsible person. If you don't know and you've done all the inductions, you've provided the information and the training, and something terrible happens, Phil, I'll get you to back me up here, then you've done everything within your power. If you don't know about it, you don't know about it when it comes to WorkSafe. Is that about right, Phil?
Yeah, and it's a big proviso. The proviso is that you've actually done your job properly by that induction, by that training, by ensuring that person is fully aware of what their requirements are. You've trained them, you've provided sufficient advice. Then they become effectively the person responsible under the legislation, and you can be removed from that liability position. There's been a recent case in New South Wales dealing with this, in that BOC was prosecuted for breach of safety laws because there were two workers who were installing gases to hospitals. Now, those two workers ended up falsifying and lying about what they did. So the court said BOC is not liable because it had no way of anticipating that its own staff would lie and fabricate the work that they were doing. So those employees presumably will be prosecuted, but the company was found not liable.
Wow, thank you. Okay, everyone, I think it's time to wind it up. Thank you all so much for your contribution. It's been great to have those chats going on the side. I hope we've answered. If not, give me a call. I'm often on the road, so love nothing better than to have a chat. We have an amazing team with SafeFarms, and we're here to help you. Thank you so much, Phil Brunner from Bailiwick Legal.
Thank you all.
Also offering the 30-minute of free time on pretty much anything, I guess, as far as what Bailiwick Legal offer. And thank you, Russell, for your contribution today. It's been really interesting to have those points clarified that are sometimes the grey areas, and to know that they are grey areas. So what can we do to do our own risk management? I'll leave you with a couple of strong statements at the end. And the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And that's from David Morrison, Sergeant Major General David Morrison. The standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And lastly, what are you putting at risk if you don't have a safety system? And what are the consequences? Fines, jail.
And a question not asked is an answer that can't be given.
Yeah, good point.
So it's a big deal. Thank you all very much, everyone. Really appreciate your time, and this will be available for others to watch going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie.
Thank you, Marie. Thanks for allowing us to participate.
Thank you.